All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is Coaching Employees Through Negativity and Conflict. So, as we get started, a couple of housekeeping items to discuss real quick. First of all, be sure and stick around at the end. We have a special offer for you, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in detail later. And if you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to go ahead and type them in. There will be a section at the end when it will be dedicated to answering those specific questions. So, with that being said, my name is Matt Neighbors. I am the Key Account Manager here at the Omnia Group, and I am happy to be on the line with you today. So, as part of what I do every day in working with my clients, it's a never-ending saga of how we address conflict and how we can overcome that type of a negative influence in our environments. And so today we're going to discuss a few different aspects. First of all, defining conflict. We'll discuss some catalysts, different styles of conflict, what the leader's role is when it comes to facilitating a resolution to conflict, and some strategies on how to go about doing that. So, getting started, the definition of conflict. So, conflict by nature, most people will always be inclined to think of it in a negative context. So, from a negative context, we always just assume the worst. When we're assuming the worst, we are often hesitant to even want to jump in on the conversation or try and get involved in it in any way whatsoever. And the definition tends to support that. So conflict is friction or opposition resulting from actual or perceived differences or incompatibilities. So those are fancy words to say it's a negative environment that's being caused by a situation and it needs to be resolved. And so in that regard, resolving that is the issue at hand. How do we go about figuring out what to do? Well, first of all, knowing your people is going to be one of the most valuable assets that you can have. So understanding who they are, how they operate, what their task orientation, prioritization responsibilities are, how they go about their day-to-day activities, and knowing how they're going to respond to different situations is going to make a big difference. So when we're thinking about conflict catalysts, we take negativity as the definition of conflict, but in actuality, what we want to be able to do is revert that to development. So it's professional development, team development, orientation that gets us going in the right direction. But what are some of the catalysts that can start these processes off? Poor communication. Obviously, with poor communication, we don't see eye to eye because we're not being able to convey what our actual thoughts and opinions are because we're not actually willing to listen or we just want to dismiss it. Everybody has a different communication style. So in your communication style, you have to understand that there are differences in everybody's communication styles. And so how to approach working in a team environment with one another is going to be vital. And to do that, understanding how to communicate appropriately is going to be the most effective way. Differences in personalities goes towards the same direction as poor communication, but personalities can often define how we handle stress and pressure. And when we're handling stress and pressure, those can be common catalysts for conflict as well. So when we get into situations and our personalities take over or our egos play the bigger part, then it doesn't attribute to anything positive with regards to whatever the outcome is going to be. And people have different sets of values. So when you have different values, oftentimes it'll influence your opinions and your thoughts. And so in those moments when your thoughts are influenced by your ego or by your specific personality, it creates a difference of opinion. And then competition. We all know those people that are highly competitive. I'm one of them. Um, when you put a competitive individual in an environment, they have a natural draw to need to win. They just have that constant need to win. And under those circumstances, what it creates is a situation where there is no give and take, there is no back and forth, there is no compromise. It's not something that we're able to actually sort of internalize, because we have that that strong desire to win, and that's what's going to take over. So understanding that those people that have that strong need to win and that desire to come out on top at all costs can help when you're trying to facilitate a resolution of the situation. And I would also say that in regards to catalysts, there can also be the in the moment type of a situation. So, oftentimes when we're under stress and pressure and we feel as though, the world's caving in on us, we get to a situation where our in the moment reaction isn't necessarily what would be indicative of either our communication style, our personalities, our values, whatever the case may be. It may just be something that is in the moment, occurs, and oftentimes we wish we could take it back, but we've already created something that is headed down the road to conflict and negativity. So some of the don'ts when we're in moments of conflict, or you're working with your team trying to resolve conflict, don't be defensive. Defensiveness is going to create situations that are going to make you part of the problem and not part of the solution. Don't overgeneralize things. You want everyone to feel as though their opinion is valued, and if you're just simplifying the situation, then you're devaluing everybody involved's opinions and thoughts on the matter. Don't forget to listen. As leaders, we're generally assertive types of people, and so an assertive type of person is going to want to just resolve the situation and not take everybody's opinions into account. So when you have that type of a situation, make sure you're listening and hearing both sides, projecting the value and the empathy that you have for the situation and for the people involved. And don't try to win. Your best opportunity to create cohesiveness out of a bad situation, such as conflict, would be to try to bring both sides to the table and try to find something that works in order to address the value in both people's opinions and resolve the situation. If you're trying to just win the situation, then you're creating the opportunity for, again, being part of the problem and not part of the solution. So, getting into conflict styles. So as we discuss this, these are some of the specific styles that we identify when it comes to conflict and how people operate under those types of situations whenever conflict does present itself. Avoidance, collaborating, competing, compromising, accommodating. Those are all different methodologies of going about conflict. When you're engaged in some sort of a debate, when you're engaged in a difference of opinion, different people have different styles. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. So with avoiding, an advantage is that the issue is trivial, and if it's trivial, then it can be avoided, and if so, then the hope would be that it would just fizzle out on its own. And the cost outweighs the benefit. So does the stress, does the premise of the issue at hand, is it really worth all that you're going to go through in dealing with this type of conflict to create a benefit that really was not worth all of the effort? And avoiding buys time. So it gives everybody the ability to calm down. It gives them the ability to try and listen to the other side, It gives people the opportunity. It's basically a pause button. Disadvantages to avoiding would be that decisions can just be made by default. So if everybody avoids the conflict, then somebody's going to make a decision, and either one or both parties involved are going to be disappointed. It could also result in employee turnover because underlying issues just tend to fester. And when that happens, we end up with situations where employees don't feel as though they can express themselves, and it's easier for them to walk out the door and try and find another opportunity than it is to have to continue doing this over and over again and then just suppressing all of the emotions that go along with it on a day-to-day basis, which eventually creates blow-ups. And so in those blow-ups, they'll oftentimes be inappropriate with a lack of perspective, lack of understanding of the consequences and the things that are coming out in the moment. So those are the advantages and disadvantages when it comes to avoiding. I would say that avoiding is just a way to not have to deal with it, but the fact is that the elephant never leaves the room. So in that regard, we always have to take into consideration that there has to be a way that we come about facilitating resolution. So competition. This is probably the most likely form of conflict that we encounter, especially as from a leadership perspective, and especially when you have when you have two very competitive personalities that are on the line. So there are advantages to competing. It does create quick decisions, so it gives you the opportunity to come to a solution quickly. Um, the outcome is critical. So if you're in a situation where you do need that quick decision, that outcome is going to come about pretty quickly. However, it's going to come at a cost. And then the sooner you get to that resolution, the sooner you can implement the procedure or the process or the task or the assignment or whatever the case may be in order for you to keep the productivity ball rolling. Healthy competition can be made fun, but you have to be careful because you always have to be aware of who your highly competitive people are, and that way you don't actually inadvertently create a situation that results in conflict as opposed to healthy competition. So you just have to remember not to let that line be crossed. So by creating healthy conflict, you can set the parameters and the boundaries, and you can manage to put yourself in a better situation. Disadvantages to competition are the strain that it causes on relationships predominantly. Anytime there is any kind of a competition that boils over and does cross that line, then you put yourself in a position where that relationship could be permanently scarred. And the underlying goal of everything that we're doing here is trying to create a team environment, a work environment, a productivity environment that is conducive to achieving the results and the outcomes that we're looking for. And opposing personalities that are under constant conflict and competing with each other creates a situation where that's going to inhibit the ability for those things to take place. It can also cause intimidation. Highly assertive people can become aggressive in times of stress or pressure, and that's particularly the case in conflict. And if you have a highly competitive person and they win, then it can create a situation that will continue to roll as you go forward in the relationship between the parties involved, because the person that did win is going to assert themselves, and it could create intimidation. And that's a factor that we need to try to avoid, obviously. And it can diminish commitment. So if you have this competition and one party loses or the other or both parties lose, or the decision is made to overrule the entire situation, whatever the case may be, it's devaluing to your employees, and it gives them the feeling as though there is a lack of commitment to them. And in that regard, you're going to put yourself in a position where that competition is going to have backfired significantly. So it's better to recognize it immediately. And the best way to do that again is by knowing your people. So collaborating. A collaboration style of conflict is going to be an overly abundant case of consideration. So if somebody is wanting to collaborate in the midst of conflict, there are advantages in the sense that you can come to a shared outcome with the respect of the different perspectives on hand. And you can actually establish a foundation in order to build upon because you've created that team environment that you're looking for. The problem is that the conflict at hand oftentimes is something that is has a time constraint on it. And so if you take too much time working through collaboration, then you could be missing deadlines. You could be creating situations where it drags out beyond the limit of what you are wanting to accomplish, and that's going to decrease productivity. It can also lead to dominant personalities attributing the vast majority of the collaboration, if that makes sense, because the reason being is that based on our personality styles, if you have a more assertive personality and you're collaborating with somebody that has a more supportive, less outspoken personality, then it's not going to actually be it's not actually going to be a true collaboration. It's going to be one personality with the majority of the ideas and the other personality with the inability to speak up and actually solve the situation as a team. And it can also, in the same form as competitiveness, it can create a lack of commitment because of that undervalued employee that you now have as part of a collaboration team who doesn't feel as though they're being able to get their thoughts and opinions expressed appropriately. So I would say that with collaboration, it can also walk the line of passive aggressiveness. Somebody with that dominant personality is going to they're going to create the appearance that they are collaborating, but when the time comes, you will see them push. And when they push, that assertiveness will come out. And that's when you're going to end up with a situation where that passive aggressiveness has just taken place and it did create that dominant personality. So unless there's a solution, there really isn't any resolution to the issue. Accommodating. So an accommodating style of conflict preserves harmony because it's two parties that are working together to be able to accommodate the other's opinions, which gives them the sense of value that they're looking for in their thoughts and opinions. It also creates leverage so that both parties can feel as though they're being respected and understood and listened to. And it can keep things on track, especially with timelines, because it promotes that team coordination and collaboration and the sense of working together as a group. The disadvantage is that you sometimes will create a false solution because oftentimes accommodating just for the sense of accommodating creates that sense of passive aggressiveness where you're accommodating the person because you don't want to create the situation, but essentially everything goes in one ear and out the other. The solution that is brought to light ends up quickly being dumped by the wayside because neither party really agreed with it in the first place. And if that's the case, it brings up accountability concerns because then you have people that are overly accommodating and working within the confines of the situation to try to avoid any kind of conflict, But when in reality, the fact is they're actually creating conflict. So it can also be one-sided. And so accommodating personalities do it by nature. If somebody is actually putting in the effort to be accommodating, then oftentimes it ends up being a one-sided situation where they are accommodating just because they feel like they have to go through the motions. And going through the motions, again, doesn't create any kind of a solution. And compromising. So in compromising, what you're working towards is a quick settlement. You're looking to break the deadlocks and save face. So all of those things put together are terrific advantages to being able to come to a resolution as far as the issue is concerned and to solve the problem and to do it at a quick pace. Problem is that you're asking them to give something up by compromising. And in doing so, you can actually invalidate the entire situation by losing trust. Uh, in that regard, you would lose trust by the fact that you have two people that are having to give up a little bit of what they were fighting for in the first place, and so they're not going to be 100% on the same page. If you're not 100% on the same page, then you're actually creating a situation where trustworthiness comes into question, and that little question mark is always going to be sitting on your shoulder wondering about that person. And compromising requires close monitoring. It's something that there needs to be a facilitator. There needs to be an objective third party. It can also derail goals. People set goals for themselves. Employees set goals for themselves. We do it on a daily basis. Things we want to accomplish, things that need to be done, things that are tasks that are on hand. And if the compromise involves not following through on all aspects of what it was that you were bringing to the table in the very beginning, then your long-term goals can be derailed, and that's a demotivator, obviously. So it creates a situation where you end up setting yourself back a little bit. So what is the leader's role in actuality? And this is the vital question, because this is how you're going to be able to create a situation that accommodates everybody, regardless of what the style of the conflict may be at hand. So the leader's role comes down to a few key aspects. The questions that are involved, uh, what's in it for me, view conflict as opportunity, team member value. So when you're thinking about each one of those things, you're weighing all of those options. And when you're asking somebody, okay, when you're asking yourself, what are the questions? Well, the questions need to be, are you capable of managing your own opinions? Because you are the facilitator, so you have to be able to be uh, bipartisan, for lack of a better word. Uh, and does the conflict situation involve you as the employee's direct manager? You don't want to interject yourself into somebody else's situation, because you could actually end up stirring the pot a little bit more and creating a situation that actually makes it more difficult for whoever the direct report is that should be handling that situation. Now, what's in it for me? So what's in it for me is essentially what you, for example, you have your two parties involved, and they're each looking at it from the perspective of what they're gaining in that particular instance. So the understanding your people and knowing the what's in it for them situation. So for example, if you asked an employee to stay late for work, if you just asked them to stay late for work, they're not going to respond very positively to that, although you'll probably get the yes sir or yes ma'am. But the case will be made that they're actually thinking that you've just created an additional time frame for them when they could be neglecting family or personal ambitions, whatever the case may be, outside of work. So instead of saying just simply, can you stay an extra half hour tonight? How about can you stay an extra half hour tonight if you can, and come in a half hour later tomorrow, or leave a half hour earlier the next day, or whatever the incentive can be to motivate them to have a positive outlook on the fact that you're asking something of them like that. So value, I've spoken quite a bit about it in regards to every aspect of each different conflict style. And the reason why is because undervalued employees are not likely to last very long. And if you have specific people, if you've got specific perspectives, different diverse values and opinions in play, being able to give feedback, whether it's public praise or whether it's a one-on-one, whether it's positive or negative, whatever the case may be, giving them some constructive criticism or some feedback is going to be valuable to them because people get motivated by the sense that they can do better. At least they should be getting motivated by that sense because those are the types of people that you want to have. Listen. It's a very simple concept, but oftentimes it's very difficult for a lot of us to do. A lot of us are talkers. Um, we have that outgoing, sociable personality where we tend to just talk our way through everything because we are engaging people, and that's what we want to do. In those types of situations, when you're facilitating a resolution to a conflict that exists, if you're not actually hearing them, then they're not understanding or appreciating that they're valued within the company. They're thinking that it's more just about the prospect of being able to resolve the situation, get out of there, and ultimately nobody's opinion, thought, process, or anything else was heard along the way. And sharing information. So if you're sharing in general with concepts, with processes, with different ideas, give suggestions. You can influence the way that people's thought processes occur based on the information that you're able to contribute based on your prior experiences, because at this point in our careers we've been through the majority of the things that we're now facilitating as leaders. So in that regard, we can share our personal experiences and the information and education that we've learned along the way to make them better employees. So creating opportunities is another strategy and another way in order to have your role influence the outcome of a conflict in that type of a situation. So with the opportunity being growth, communication, productivity, engagement, if you're starting with the concept of building a team and you want, whether it's an established team that has existing issues or a new team that's growing from the foundation up, the fact that you create that type of an environment where your employees feel valued, the team is able to work together, and you can start that growth process, you're building the right foundation for your team, which will lead to improved communication because people feel as though everybody around them is more receptive and open to their thoughts and opinions. That obviously leads to productivity, and that's the ultimate goal, is to have the most productive team in the industry, whatever industry that may be. So if you're creating that foundation, establishing positive communication, increasing productivity, then you're going to have fully engaged employees. And fully engaged employees are motivated, they're incentivized, they're conflict free for the most part, unless something does come up. But in those situations, you have a baseline for being able to create the opportunity to resolve the conflict in whatever the most productive way is going to be. So strategies for managing conflict. The fine line is where you can draw it in the sand and create the situation where you can facilitate the outcome or the resolution. Um, And you can draw that line in the sand one way or the other. You can either draw it as it's going to be your decision. You can draw it as you need a decision. You can draw the line any way that you feel is going to be most valuable to getting an actual solution to the situation, as well as making sure that everybody feels as though their opinions were valued. Establish ground rules. So if you're going to be uh, look at any sports league, look at any organization. There are rules, guidelines, protocols, procedures. So when it comes to team involvement and your leadership role, managing that conflict is going to come with the understanding ahead of time that there are ground rules in place for how this is going to happen. So those ground rules can be any number of different variables, and it's really going to be set on what your expectations for your team are and how you expect your organization um, to resolve conflict when those situations arise. And you always have to be the arbiter. You have to stay impartial, bipartisan. You don't take sides. Um, it's for obvious reasons, but things like the importance of maintaining motivation in your team, understanding your people and knowing how to motivate them and keep them feeling valued, and identify fire starters. So you can oftentimes identify a conflict before it's even presenting itself, whether that be through just your recognition of the situation at hand ahead of time, whether it's based on your experience with similar situations, whatever the case may be. Get out in front of it. That's the best advice I can give you is get out in front of it and make sure that you're setting the table, so to speak, so that people have their opportunities to be able to follow the ground rules with your impartiality and create a cohesive unit by avoiding the conflict before it develops. So conflict, as I mentioned earlier, can be developmental. So with regards to that, there's a lot of growth that comes from conflict. So when you create that positive aspect and focus on the development of your team, conflict can positively sway communication, and it can do that basically by facilitating that communication. It'll encourage people to be more open with their thoughts and their opinions and feel more comfortable in that environment and understand their value and their contribution to the team. It can make your meeting more productive. That goes to the identifying the fire starters, I would think, because if you're able to identify things ahead of time and you want to have the most productivity in the meeting, put it down on the agenda as something that's going to be addressed, because that'll be the best forum for it. You'll have more opinions involved. It won't be a he said, she said, one versus two type of thing. It'll be an open meeting and an open forum with you as the facilitator, allowing the situation to resolve itself with all of the team's input. And it can also alert you to low employee engagement. So if conflict exists and people with their different types of personalities do, on the one hand, assert themselves, you see that there's engagement there. And if you have somebody else that just throws their hands up in the air and doesn't want to deal with it, or just avoids it altogether, or just ignores it, then you could be cued into the fact that you do have some low employee engagement. So when you're wrapping up, use conflict as a springboard. So have it propel you to further growth. Implement the ideas and the concepts that come into play. Figure out how to best communicate those situations with your people, and how best these types of situations are going to be resolved in the future. So each conflict presents an opportunity to learn in order to avoid the same situation arising twice. And it can be used to create that springboard into more open environments for your teams to be able to express themselves. Separate people from the problem. So oftentimes things can get intense or heated. Sometimes people just need to go to their corners, take a little time out, because under those situations, emotions start to run high. When emotions start to run high, emotions tend to take over, and you're not going to have any productive results that come from that type of a situation. So if you could just tell them, let's take a break, we'll revisit this at such and such time, and remove them from the situation, give them a chance to catch their breath, calm down, coordinate their thoughts, organize their feelings, and then bring it back to the table at the appropriate time when everybody has had a chance to kind of debrief themselves. Communicate. It's key to everything. Communication is the vital role that's played in team environments, and open communication from a positive perspective is going to be the best facilitator for keeping those conflicts out of your hands. If you create the environment, build the foundation, establish the ground rules, you create the situation where positive communication runs rampant on your team, then you've done a great job of keeping all of that negativity not only out of your office, but out of the workplace altogether. And listen. Sometimes people just want to be heard, and you don't even necessarily have to have the solution. You just need to hear out the problem. And then you can make the determination on whether or not you actually need to contribute to the solution or not. So if you do feel as though you're put in that position of having to be the one that draws the line in the sand, then again, just remember to hear everybody's thoughts and opinions, take everything into account, and then create a positive way to come to a solution to the issue at hand. So, with that being said, that is negativity and conflict in a nutshell, and how we are facilitators and the roles that we play in working towards the resolution of the issue at hand. What you're seeing on the screen are some of our reports that are actually beneficial with regards to conflict, in the sense that they can help you identify specific personality styles. And in those personality styles, what you'll find is that you can identify who your highly competitive people are, who your more reserved people are, who your talkers are, who your listeners are, um, who your fast-paced multitaskers are, who your routine-oriented people are, um, and who's going to work well with management oversight and who needs a little bit more space. All of these things are motivators and demotivators in the way that your people present themselves, and it's all going to be attributable to the way that conflict is handled. So, with that being said, specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about the professional development report in regards to conflict, and it goes specifically to these areas on the right-hand side of the screen. So with professional development, what you're looking at is your opportunity to be able to gain some in-depth insight into who your people are. So by identifying whether they are, for example, in columns 1 and 2, more assertive, as in a column 1, or more reserved and risk averse in a column in a taller column 2. That's going to give you some insight into who's going to be more dominant in that type of a situation, and um, who's going to be more productive in regards to being able to be more accommodating, collaborate more efficiently, be able to abide by the guidelines and the ground rules, things like that. But it also gives you some development insight that's specific to the areas of opportunity that you're going to be able to utilize when you are engaging the people that are in conflict, because you're going to know more about your people than you did prior to. So things such as communication style, strengths, challenges, pace and adaptability, um, motivators, demotivators, areas of opportunity, things that you can focus on from a leadership perspective to not only understand your people, but to give you the opportunity to be able to also understand how best to hear them. And by hearing them, you're going to provide value to them. You're going to make them feel as though they're part of the team. And in that opportunity, you're going to actually be creating a better situation for yourself to resolve the conflict without it getting out of hand. So, do we have any questions? Okay, we don't have any questions. So I mentioned early on that we have a special offer for you. If you look down in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a promo code there. So for all of you non-Omnia clients that are not as familiar with the reports that I just talked about, oh, we have a question come in. All right, so real quick, you can click on the link above and use the promo code in order to give yourself the opportunity to be able to take the assessment, understand the professional development a little bit better. We also are looking for any Google reviews that you might have for our Lunch and Learn seminars, as well as feel free to give us some feedback on our rating scale in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, I did have the question come up as to whether there are really two legitimate sides to every story. In each individual's mind, their side is legitimate. And so with that understanding, the appreciation and the understanding to hear what they feel is the legitimacy of their side gives them the opportunity to feel that value and understand that they are being heard. Doesn't necessarily mean that something outrageous is going to fly and we're going to compromise and allow that to happen. But understanding that they have been heard and valued and understood will give them the opportunity to feel legitimized, and in that regard you can utilize that information to come to a realistic solution to the situation, whatever that may be. So as you see in the chat board there on the left hand side, click on free pro development report and use the promo code in order to get your free professional development report. So if I don't have any more questions, it has been my pleasure, folks, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in today, and I hope to speak with you again very soon.